Welcome back to another episode of TFC Talks, the podcast to explore all the things mental health, relationship, and personal growth. I'm your host, Amanda Davison. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist and CEO at The Family Connection. I'm so excited to be diving in today to our topic that, can I just say, is incredibly timely because it often gets so overlooked. And as we go through this next season, the topic really focuses on what the rhythms of life look like and how do we honor those rhythms, very similar to how we honor those seasons. Life has its kind of natural ebbs and flows, and so do we. Just like the seasons as we're transitioning from summer to fall and we're watching the leaves come off of the tree, things crisp up, or even some of my friends who love the pumpkin spice season, whether you're a pro pumpkin spice or a no thank you pumpkin spice, our energy levels, our emotions, and even the process of the world around us has natural ebbs and flows. But with the hustle and the demands of our such a busy life, and oftentimes just so many things happening at once, it's easy for us sometimes to lose perspective on the rhythms and the fact that change is inevitable. And that can often lead us to stress, to burnout, and sometimes even a sense of disconnection. How many of you guys, like me, have ever tried to hide that you're in a season? Instead of honoring the fact that seasons exist and different things grow in different seasons. Today, I'm excited to be joined with a really great friend and colleague and a fellow marriage and family therapist, Sandra Rivera. She's a licensed marriage and family therapist. She's a clinical director. She is a wealth of knowledge when it comes to so many things about trauma, about human behavior, about relationships. And she really, as long as I've known her, has been incredibly great at articulating what it's like to have natural rhythms and to constantly be trying to find that flow about what's going on. A lot of times it's easy to hear things about balance. And one of the things that we really learned through the years is balance is kind of one of those mirages, those things that you see at the end of the road and you think are available and accessible. But the reality is that we're always living in a state of flow. And sometimes our scales are a little bit unbalanced, but our goal is to always try to keep a sense of equilibrium. So welcome, Sandra. Thank you so much for joining. We're going to have so much fun today.
Thank you, Amanda.
So whether you're feeling out of sync on your day-to-day, or you're just curious about how honoring your natural rhythms can improve your mental health, stay with us because Sandra and I are going to keep you rolling on the floor and you don't want to miss this conversation. So Sandra, tell us a little bit. You are naturally an expert on rhythms and being that guru when it comes to that. What does that mean to you to understand natural rhythms?
So for me, it's really about like self-awareness. I think you definitely have to have self-awareness. If you're not okay, I always tell people, and my clients included, that when we're not okay, if we're not dealing with it, it comes out sideways. So it's going to come out some way, whether that's through lack of sleep, we're not eating, whatever that looks like. Maybe we start to indulge in things like too much food or, unfortunately, sometimes clients with substance abuse. And so if we're not in sync with ourselves, it will come out and it will put us in a place to have to deal with it, even when we don't want to, because our body wants to be in a rhythm and it wants to be in balance.
I love that you're talking about how our body just craves that like fancy word homeostasis, right?
Yeah.
It requires that level of predictability to it. For people who may not be aware, what is self-awareness? Like if you were to put that in like your terms.
I think it's when you can feel it in your body, so maybe if someone's having worry or they're having anxiety, they might feel their heart racing or they might feel it in their stomach. Maybe it's when you get the butterflies or it's tight. And so your body is indicating something's not okay. It's when we almost go into like a fight or flight, like danger, like something's wrong. Our body tells us when we're not in balance. And so it's being able to pay attention to those to be able to get ourselves back in sync.
So it sounds like even a self-awareness in a very non-car girl, and Sandra actually is a car girl. So it's almost like that place of making sure that we're looking at the lights on the dashboard of our car.
Yeah.
And I hear you kind of saying that the lights for the dashboard of the car are what's happening within our body.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, good way to look at it. Got to check your engine light.
I try to ignore that. I'm also one of those people on the
right.
Side note. Are you a, oh no, don't let the gas light come on? Or are you a gas light's on, I think I can get a couple more miles?
That's me. I'm going to go as far as I can and then ask my husband to fill up my car because I don't want to.
Love it. If I never have to fill gas in the gas tank again, I will be so much happier.
But that's a perfect example of we are like a car. Like if our gas is running out, like we push ourselves to fumes and sometimes we run out and we have to recheck ourselves. So,
and at least what my husband tells me is if that were to happen, it's really hard on the engine.
Exactly.
And so from a self-awareness place, how do those things tie together?
Right. So I think if you're not, just like a car, if you're not taking care of it, it's going to break. And that's when people start to have, high risk for heart attack or, again, like problems with sleep, a lot of medical issues. Maybe people will start like isolating or cutting off friendships or relationships. And so things in our life start to go in a different direction that doesn't fit us and it's not healthy anymore and things are kind of breaking. And so that's when we want to do our check engine light.
Yeah, so part of that rhythm I hear is that things are not kind of in a smooth flow of rhythm, but they're really in a state of like the car's on the side of the road or there's smoke coming out of the engine and we're like, I still got 5 more miles.
Yeah, exactly. And sometimes we want to check our engine before it gets to that 5 more miles or we're on the side of the road. Like we want to check ourselves before then. And so starting to be aware of those little body cues or just what's going on with us, not just physically, but maybe your thinking changes, maybe it gets more negative. And so those are ways that we want to be aware of being out of our rhythm.
So when you think about that, if I were sitting across from somebody and they're like, how my body feels, Sandra? Like, are you talking about like, what are you even saying? Right. Like, how would you talk to somebody about even just checking in with that rhythm or that flow for somebody who might have a little bit of a, what you talking about, Willis face?
Right. I think with my clients, I do a lot of education around, for example, around like what they may be feeling. What does depression look like? What does an anxiety look like? And so really helping them understand what those symptoms could be. So this is what your heart can feel. These are some of the thoughts that you can feel. This is, loss of pleasure and things or appetite. And you might start to feel hot or you might, just different things that they can start to feel and help them connect themselves. Because sometimes they don't really realize like they're disconnected, especially if you're working with someone with trauma and their coping skill has been dissociation. The way they've coped and kept their rhythm is by not being connected. And so they may not worry about it. For example, I have a client right now who's focusing on just when she's overstimulated, eating gum. Like as simple as it is, it's helping her to be in the present moment and stay grounding because she's been so dissociated and so disconnected from herself. We're working on very simple things for her to connect.
So to just kind of like be present in our body is like the first step of really like kind of being aware of what's happening. And then it sounds like from there, we're taking that step of really identifying and labeling.
Yeah, absolutely. And so helping them even when it's something basic. I think a lot of times we have our own like inner strengths. And so I think it's being able to be resilient and pull those up. Even when it can be maladaptive, how can we make it adaptive for them?
What do you say with like somebody who wants to bring up some of those labels, but maybe the labels have a lot of judgment behind them?
Yeah.
How do you help somebody navigate that, or what would you encourage our listeners to do to help them label but maybe not get caught up in a judgment trap?
Yeah, so I think one of the things, because I think that happens a lot when you're working with someone or just a colleague or whatever that looks like, but I think it's just trying to hear them, like, what does it mean for them to have that label or that negativity or however you want to look at it. But it's helping, like, I ask them, okay, then what does it mean for you? Like, what do you want it to be called? So if I use the word depression and you don't like that, what do you want it to be called? Is it sadness? Is it, isolate? Like, what is the word that you want? And so it's working on renaming it for them. So they feel comfortable and it doesn't feel so negative. And I think it's also normalizing some of the stigma around some of those words.
Yeah, I love that you're bringing up that the word that's used is not as important as the connection that people have, that it's meaningful to them. It doesn't have to be meaningful to everyone else.
Exactly.
I have a friend, and one of the things that we kind of joke about is every so often I'll kind of see her and she'll get a little like, I call her, I'm like, oh, there's your tahini, like your tahini is coming out, right? And so it's our way of kind of saying like, hey, what's going on there? And so I love that you're kind of talking about the word doesn't have to make sense to anyone or everyone else.
Right. And I really try to even, take away negative words. So for example, if I'm working with a couple and the wife is emotional, I try to use they're passionate instead of emotional. And so I think that helps to reframe and it helps to change the way they're thinking on things.
Yeah, I love that you're talking about kind of bringing those out. And even in the context of like mental health and well-being, what I heard you say is words that are a normal part of human behavior, right? Feeling sad, or it might feel like depression, but it's things that everybody goes through.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it goes into like who we are, even at the family connection, and really being able to normalize those things. And I think it goes into of the challenging the stigma of mental health. And so I really believe that. And I think that really goes into like balance in your rhythm. And so I'm passionate about that. Like, we want to take the stigma away. And you're not bad just because you have things you're dealing with.
I love that you bring that up. It's kind of one of my like interesting topics, right? Like one of the things we talk about a lot here is we exist to change mental health, right? And a lot of times I hear people think about like mental health as somebody else has that or a certain type of like where they're receiving services or what that looks like. And it always makes me chuckle a little bit because to me, it's the equivalent of saying, I have physical health. Yeah. But you don't.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, absolutely.
And so we all have mental health. Like we all have a mental health and we have to manage and we need to be aware of that flow. And so when you think about that, what are some of the natural forces that kind of push up against that mental health that we all experience?
I think honestly, it's experience. I think that mental health is a newer field. And so I think that as a society, we're all learning it. And I think there's a big push on mental health right now. And so now it almost feels like we're in this part of you're cool if you have mental health issues.
And we all do.
Right. And we all do. But how do we balance it out? Like it's okay if you do. And what does that look like? It's being able to help someone normalize it. It's not scary to talk about. It doesn't mean that you're bad. It doesn't mean that you're the black sheep of your family. We all have things that we're struggling with, whether it's physical, whether it's mental health. And there's different levels. Sometimes people have to be in the hospital, or they just need to do counseling, or they need to do physical therapy. Like, it just really depends on what's going on with that person. But I think a big thing for me is that you're okay. Like, you're not bad. And I think there's such a stigma on that.
I love that when we're talking about that piece of like that there's stigma and like not having mental health, part of that flow is that we all are balancing mental health. To what extent, right? And we all have daily demands and experiences that impact our mental health, right? That overall well-being of how we're doing.
Right.
What are some of those experiences or those daily demands that people might see or that our listeners might be kind of dealing with that would have an impact or influence on how healthy they are on the continuum of everyone's mental health?
I think as a society right now, there's a lot of things that we're dealing with right now. We have an election coming up. And so I think that's a big thing that there's a lot of different emotions. There's fears, there's excitement, there's challenges. And so I think as a society, it puts us in different questions, a lot of different things. It questions our faith, our values, our habits, our all of those things. And so I think that's one big thing that as a community as a whole we're facing. But I think it impacts people on the smaller scale as far as, on a state level, like housing, jobs, like these are the things that people are really concerned about right now. I think even generational, the way that kids do things now is completely different than just the way that you and I did it. And I would hope to say that we're not old, but we're kind of old. And so
you are, I'm not, just kidding.
But even in our generation, it's different than the way that kids look at things now. They're more about technology and that's how they function, where someone in an older generation is not. So I think there's so much change happening in the society that is putting a lot of pressure on families and individuals right now. And it's hard to keep in a rhythm and figuring out what that looks like.
I love that you bring up like so many things from just such a big macro, like society level to like what's happening individually within somebody's household and, what dinner looks like or if they have their basic needs met. When we think about the ways that like basic needs might impact our overall flow, can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I think that, one thing that I really work with people on is safety. And so to me, safety is a basic need. And so a basic needs goes into food, shelter. Like, do you have the basic things that you need to focus and function as a human being? And so if you don't have that, then we're going to go into survival mode. We're going to do the things that we need to do to be okay. And so I do a lot with my clients around creating safety. I think it's super important. Even if it's just a little bit of safety, it helps them feel better. And I think that really gives people balance and gives them rhythm to be able to move forward and have some motivation to move forward.
Yeah, I love that you're talking about that safety at such a personal level, right? Part of that flow that we're talking about in that rhythm is kind of what's within our control and what's outside of our control. And so really hearing that there are some things when it comes to safety that is within our control. It doesn't mean everything is for everyone, but there are some things. And so how do we control what we can control and let go of the things that maybe we can't control?
Right, absolutely. So yeah, I think it's being able to help people identify what they have control. I think it's being able to bring in their strengths and bring in things like that. Even if I'm working with someone who maybe I worked with people that do drug dealing for a profession, right? And like maybe like maladaptive to some, but that's how they've survived. And so how do you build that as a strength to make it more healthy for them, that it's not necessarily doing that, but they have a strength of being able to like hustle and do money and work hard. And so how can you do that and then replace it with something else? And so I think it's being able to take even the things that the people feel are out of control and help them see it. Like I do a lot of strength-based stuff, like really pulling in people's strengths, even if they feel like they don't have any. And so honestly, I think a big thing for people in rhythm is hope. I think really installing hope for people is something to really like believe in them. It really does, I feel like, makes such a difference.
I think there's so much wisdom in what you're saying in terms of like not allowing a judge or a critic to kind of come in, even within ourselves, or sometimes we have it with other people, but to really recognize and meet people where they are and give them some hope and give them some perspective that helps kind of move. And I think as we look towards the election, one of the things that I would really encourage everyone to do to balance what having a healthy rhythm looks like is you may not be able to control the outcome of an election, but you can control your vote. And so really focused on, did you do your part? And then stepping back and letting go of ownership of things that are outside of your control and allowing that to create a healthy rhythm for you and also those around you.
Absolutely.
So let's talk a little bit about what some of the consequences might be of ignoring that rhythm, ignoring those flows.
Yeah. So I think, as a therapist, I think that's why people come see us is because a lot of times they're at that place where they've been ignoring the balance, they've been ignoring the natural rhythms. That's where maybe they feel out of control or their anxiety. You can see it through anger, depression, substance abuse. Like you start to see those things. And that's why people will come see us, which is a good thing. But those are, a lack of sleep, or maybe you start calling into your job because you feel like you're not motivated anymore. Again, like you start isolating, like there's things like that, like you don't want to hang out with your friends or your family because you just don't have the motivation at the moment. And so it's recognizing where you're at, and that's okay for a while. But you have to be able to recognize it to get the help. And it doesn't have to always be to come to counseling, but having supports and resources for yourself to continue to navigate.
So kind of in that step process that you were talking about earlier, you talked about like that first step was awareness, right? You had to really get in connection with yourself. And then from connection, you can make some decisions about what movement looks like, but it really requires that awareness first.
Yes, absolutely. And I think it's funny that I'm doing this podcast, because I don't necessarily believe that there's a straight balance. Things are up and down. And that's what I really work with my clients on, like supervisees, things like that. Things are never linear. They're always going to be up and down. There's going to be seasons where we're up like this and seasons where we're not. And there might be little bumps in the road. But how do you manage, look for this versus this? And so I think that's something to normalize, that there's no such thing really as linear, like everything's okay and in balance. At least I feel.
Oh yeah, I agree. I love that you bring that up because I think in an era of, social media and some of those expectations, it can be really easy for us to see everybody else on their high day and assume that everybody else is living a great day every day, and we're the only ones that are really experiencing challenges. And I notice a propensity for people to really focus more on their bad days for themselves and then look at everybody else's highlight reel externally.
Yep, absolutely. And so I think with social media and all those things that are in our face where everything looks like it's good and perfect, it makes it challenging, but remembering that's not reality. And that's not life. And so you're gonna have challenges. How do you have supports and the things that you need to have a rhythm and have somewhat of a balance, but remember the ups and downs?
Yeah, I love that we talk about the consequences, right? And sometimes we talked about consequences of negative energy, right? Like that negative flow happening when we ignore those things. But I also think of things like a rose bush. If we don't prune back the roses, then the quality and the quantity of the roses that will come after that is actually poorer than if we took some time to cut it back or have a winter or have a season where it's not beautiful and all things look good, because
Right.
there's a lot of development that's happening even when we can't see it.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I think being able to, even if it's a 5-minute pruning, it will help you. It will help the rose bush grow, and it will help you to be able to move forward.
Yeah, I also think of kind of like winter, right? I think a lot of times we can look outside in nature and see a winter, right? And we can assume all of the leaves have fallen off. There's nothing happening within the tree. It's just deadness.
Right.
But what we know is that the root system is getting a lot stronger to be able to sustain the growth that's coming in spring and summer.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah.
So speak to like some of those consequences in terms of like, how do winters with people actually help us?
Yeah. So I think with winters, except for Christmas, I think we want to be able to slow down. As Amanda said earlier in the podcast, like I love coffee and I love pumpkin spice. So I think just being able to go get coffee, to be able to connect with people. I think as it gets darker, you know, hopefully you can take some time to allow yourself to slow down, be with your family, being able to connect. A lot of times this is when families and communities do connect because of the holidays. And so being able to enjoy that time with your family, to enjoy, and even if you don't have a family that's close, you know, how do you have resources? And
your chosen family.
Right, exactly. Like your chosen family, or you go volunteer and you help someone else that needs the help, because that in itself can make us feel better. So I think for me, winter is like a time of resetting and starting and getting ready for the next year, you know, as we go into that. But I think it's about resetting.
I love that. I think about the resetting, and I think about just that time to reflect. And I also think that so many times we come to holidays or certain experiences with this like mountaintop expectation. And sometimes with the ebbs and flows of seasons, sometimes holidays are actually like some of our rock bottom moments. Right,
absolutely. And recognizing that happens, and recognizing where you can be. For example, I'm going to use myself. Like I had a birthday this last week, but I recognize where I'm at personally. Like I just needed to really do nothing.
Introvert time.
Yeah. I needed introvert time. Yes. And that was okay. That was something that I recognized I needed at the moment because things that I'm dealing with. And so I think it's the same thing with holidays. We don't always have to push ourselves through because that's what we think the expectation is. It's okay to just take that moment to rest and reset.
I love that. So kind of in that step process, right? We're talking about awareness. You're talking about that like self-awareness. Where are you at? Where do you want to go? And I also hear like almost a third step in that of recognizing what is this season telling you that you need to honor within yourself that may be different than what you thought you would be on your birthday or you thought it would be.
Yeah, absolutely.
With expectations.
Yeah. And I think that's goes back into the life. Like life, we want to predict it. It's not predictable. And we need to go with the flow, even if it's a big week at the moment. Like we want to go with the flow.
Yeah, I love that. I think about flow and I think about natural rhythms and like identifying natural rhythms. And it often brings me to the ocean and watching the waves kind of come in and come out and the different sizes of waves. Give our listeners some practical strategies to help them become aware of some of their unique rhythms, maybe being aware of their emotional energies, or maybe even their peaks and valleys when it comes to emotional, and then how that might play out even if they're listening or tuning in to those physical needs as well.
Yeah, so I'm going to bring in some clinical stuff, but I think using a technique from DBT, so dialectical behavioral therapy. And so a lot of that is about being able to help us with our emotions. It's about mindfulness. It's about distress tolerance. So that's just being able to handle it. How do we handle the situation even if it sucks? Like how do we just manage through it? And so looking at, the ocean, it's like you're a surfer, right? And so there's going to be the high tides where it's really high and you just got to hang on for dear life. And then you're going to go down and you just continue to ride the wave. And so being aware, like when your wave's high, that's your high emotion. How do I stay up there? And then when you're down, like you're okay. Like maybe that's where you're calm. But as we were talking about earlier, I think it goes into everything's not just straight and calm, because an ocean's not straight and calm. Even when it's calm, there's still a little bit of bumps in the water. And so think about the tides in the water as your emotions. And so even in the ocean, even in the seasons, the ocean changes, and so do we. And so I think it's being able to recognize some of those things, being able to be mindful, being able to, with mindfulness, a lot of people think about, the way I like to look at it is that you can be mindful where your mind's completely full of stuff, or you can be mindful and focusing on the thing that's in front of you and being present at that moment. And so being in the moment will help you to be able to hopefully manage what you're going through, and know that even in the moment when it feels hard, you will get through it. There is always a way through it. You just have to figure it out.
Yeah. I love one of the things that you're talking about without necessarily saying it is using time as our ally, right? Time is oftentimes seen, our emotions when the peak is high tells us we have to act right now. Or when it's low, it's always going to be this way. It's always going to be low tide. And allowing time to really be an ally that helps us see the natural rhythm and flow of everything that's happening. And when you're talking about that mindful with two L's, right? 2L, that mindful, F-U-L-L, is where we don't want to be, because it doesn't allow us to be present and really experience the joys that can come with being in the ocean and riding the waves and not choosing every wave to ride.
Right, absolutely. I think that's a good way to look at it too. You don't want to ride every ride.
Not every wave. That you don't ever see a surfer do that. I mean, I don't surf, but I've watched them.
Yeah, no.
Tell me a little bit, when we think about mindfulness, I think a lot of times even the 1L mindfulness, a lot of people kind of have the kind of view, or I think of, different cartoon characters that kind of do that. What does that look like for the everyday person to practice mindfulness?
Yeah, so mindful can just be remember, it's just focusing on what's in front of you at that moment. Maybe you have a million things at home that you're dealing with and you just have to get to work, and you just focus on helping that customer at that moment. You're being mindful. Or maybe it's going to use, a lot of times with mindfulness, we use our 5 senses. And so, maybe you're just chewing a piece of gum, a piece of candy, or you're lighting a candle, you're taking a bath, you're just being present with yourself, or you're just looking at a picture and focusing. Right now I'm looking in Amanda's office and looking at a picture of an ocean, and so taking a few minutes and just being able to stare at it and clear your mind and reset and be okay. And so use your 5 senses sometimes to be able to check in with yourself. Just remember to take one thing at a time, one day at a time. I think one thing that we like to say around here is 1%. I think a lot of times we want to try to do 100 things 100% of the time, every single day. Get 1% of that done. That's what you can focus on.
Yeah, 1% better, right? Just that 1%. And I think that a lot of times mindfulness has that connotation that you have to have this extended period of time that you're going to really be present. And I love the examples that you brought, because none of those examples are things that people don't naturally do. They aren't long, intensive things. Some are a little bit longer, like a bath, but a piece of gum is right then, and you're just choosing what you're focusing on.
Yeah, absolutely. You can draw, you can write in a coloring book, or, those things are really great. It just helps you to focus on that thing.
Yeah, I love, for me, that first drink of coffee in the morning, just holding the coffee cup, taking it in and just being
yep, exactly.
this is just goodness right here.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I love the same thing. So.
I know, we do too. We're both like coffee.
Yes.
Although I know yours has pumpkin in it most of the time in this season.
It does.
Which, I mean, I like it. I just don't love it as much as you. When we think about relationships and what supporting natural rhythms might look like in relationships with work and maybe other people, what are some tips and tricks that you might have in terms of respecting other people's natural rhythms and also advocating for what your own rhythms may need to look like?
Yeah, so I think, going into like you want to support them, you want to be aware. I think it's checking in with the person, making sure they're okay, especially if you notice that they don't seem like they normally are. Maybe someone, it can be your spouse or it can be a coworker, and they don't seem like happy or joyful, or, checking in like, hey, are you okay? I've noticed this difference, and seeing if they'll talk to you. And if they don't, or they tell you, being able just to listen and ask them just what do they need. Maybe they just need nothing. Maybe they need someone just to sit with them. Maybe they just need to go for a walk with you. And so check in with people and recognizing that you don't have to, if someone's not okay, you don't have to fix it. You can be okay to not be okay, and they're okay to not be okay. So I think that goes into some of it. Like, that's a connection piece, respecting them when they're not okay, but supporting them too. And sometimes it's being able to, hey, like, I know that you're like, I just need space, and I see you, and I'm going to challenge you a little bit because I care and I love you. And how can we walk with this together?
I love the wisdom in that, right? That idea that sometimes that natural rhythm is about advocating for ourselves, right? Sometimes it's about that self-awareness. And sometimes it's also about loving somebody enough to reach out and say, I see you. And then giving them dignity of risk to choose to engage or not.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's important to have that for yourself and also provide it for other people.
One of the things I think about as a fellow marriage and family therapist, I think about couples, right? And I think about if I really had to narrow down a lot of what brings couples into, services or to the end of relationships, whatever that may look like for them. One of the things that I really kind of think about when I think about this topic is it's often a lack of ability to allow people space and still be connected and engaged, to have natural rhythms and flows.
Yes, absolutely.
Can you speak to that a little bit? Like, what would they be seeing in their relationships, either friendships, intimate partner relationships, family relationships?
If their rhythm wasn't...
where they're maybe not honoring that rhythm with each other in either direction.
Right. Well, maybe, for example, in a couple, the couple is starting to have financial issues, or the wife lost her job or something like that. And so she's struggling, and then the husband doesn't know how to react to it or support her. And he's trying to support her, over support her. And then she's like, no, leave me alone. And she isolates and shuts down. And then he starts freaking out. And then there's just this pull away from each other instead of, no, she's okay. Like, I'm trying to support her, still being there, even when she's not okay. Be there. And so I think that keeps people connected and not pulling people away, that they're not in their natural rhythm, but how do they almost create another rhythm for themselves? So I think it's getting rid of old rhythms that no longer are serving the relationship anymore. And how can you reestablish it?
Yeah, it kind of like, even when you were talking about your hands, right? You're kind of going this part coming over here, and like you're like somebody's trying to actively pull them over here. But part of that rhythm that you're talking about is reaching out, allowing that space to exist, and allowing, like, doing our own, like, it's okay process to stay here, even though we might feel really uncomfortable. And then allowing the other party to to engage when they're ready and have that connection versus doing some of that rubber band effect, right? And then we come all the way over here and now the gap between us is so much bigger.
Right. And I like to say that change or challenge or things that couples or families or peers, friends are uncomfortable with doesn't necessarily mean that it's a bad thing. A lot of times that's actually when change is happening. And so I like to remind people of that. Like, it might feel like that's the hardest time for us, but it actually can be the best time because it may not feel like it in the moment, but it's creating a new rhythm. It's creating a new focus.
Yeah, that's when we're growing, right? And growing is hard.
Growing sucks.
It does. We think about it with those kids when they have their growing pains, and we just forget when we get older that any growth that we're having, whatever that may look like, is going to come with pain because it's something new and different.
Right. And just because we're adults, just because we're therapists, we all have things.
We are not exempt.
No, we all grow. We all have challenges.
It'd be nice if we could figure that out, though. Like, I'm just saying, like, I wouldn't, I mean, I want to grow and that part's good, but sometimes I'm like, man, this is hard.
Yes, I agree.
I think of the other thing I think about a lot of times with couples is I think of, different couples I've worked with about how they often wait so long to seek support and how important it is when that rhythm is off. There's never a time that's too soon to seek support. And sometimes there are times where it's not too late, but it's a heck of a lot harder to rebuild two engines, right, with a screwdriver than it is to kind of bring everybody to the table before both engines have busted up. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Whatever happens to engines.
They die, they blow up, they do all those things.
I don't know. They don't work.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
So as we kind of talk about the role of self-compassion in honoring rhythms, I think this is a place that just you're always really good at professionally, but I also think it's a place that you're really having to tap into personally about honoring self-compassion in your rhythm. Teach us your tips and tricks and wisdom. How do you do it?
So I think for me, in being real, it sucks and it's stupid and I don't want to do it half the time. And I can be I am very self-compassionate for other people. But I think it's been being able to do my own work in the process. Being able to stop when I needed it, being able to check in with myself when I needed it, and being okay with not being okay. So I think that's the biggest thing is that's okay. It's okay when I'm not okay. And how do I still continue to do the things I need to do, and how do I also take a break when I need to, and how do I use supports when I need to, or have people like Amanda who pushes me when I don't want to be, but also allows me to have self-compassion and just have emotions sometimes, and that's okay. And so if I can't do it, I can't teach people to do it. And so I think it also goes into role modeling.
How do you help people differentiate that feeling of I'm not okay doesn't mean I'm not safe? That those are not the same thing. But I think a lot of times when we feel like we're not okay, our natural propensity is to feel that we're not safe.
Right.
How do you help people differentiate that?
Right. So I think I do a lot around function of behavior. And so I think a big function of behavior that a lot of people do is avoidance. And so I think when people are not okay, one thing that they want to do is, cut, hurt themselves, kill themselves. And so I think, again, not judging their thoughts and those feelings, to me, cutting or self-harm, yes, it's important that we assess for safety and we do all those things, but that could just be the way that they're coping at the moment. And how do you teach them to cope differently? How do you teach them to ride through the avoidance and the hardness, and helping them really is it that you want to actually kill yourself and not be here because you don't feel safe? Or is it because you're just really struggling and you want to run away from what's happening? Because there is a difference. And so safety is really that place of like, I'm not okay, or I'm not in a safe place. Like the people I'm around, or I do want to hurt myself. Or right now, like life just sucks and like, I don't want to deal with it. And that's okay too. And so I think it's really just helping them separate really where they are and what does safety even look like.
Yeah, so I think of that safety, like if you're having thoughts of wanting to hurt yourself or you're wanting to die, absolutely reaching out for support and connection, using resources like pound 988 to absolutely get that support and connection.
Absolutely.
Because when you're using that awareness, what you're saying is that I have exceeded my abilities to manage what's going on with me right now, and I feel like I need to escape. And so for those people like you're saying that are around loved ones that are struggling, also being able to love them where they're at without judging or reacting and not getting caught up in that high emotional wave that you're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. Be with them. Just because someone's overwhelmed or they're stressed or they're anxious, don't think that they're seeking attention either. Like take it serious because you never know. And so even if it's this, they need to talk to someone, they need to go to therapy for a little while, take it serious and let that person support them to get them in the right direction, because we want to make sure that people are safe. Even if someone's doing it for attention, they're crying out for help.
Right. That is a good thing, right?
Yes.
That is a resource that they're accessing to say, flagging down, I've broken down on the side of the road. I need help.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's not something that is judged. It's something that comes along and says, how can we walk with you in this?
But like you said, you know, it doesn't have to mean we have to meet them in an escalation. Just how do we love them and come beside them?
So I think when we're talking about all of these self-compassions, we're talking about honoring the rhythms. I think it's an important part for us to also understand the norms of culture and the way culture can sometimes maybe encourage us from a machismo place of, you think of like Hispanic culture where we're inclined to say, you know, we don't share those things. Or, you know, I think of some of like family cultures, right? Like pull yourself up by your bootstraps, like don't share that. When people are maybe feeling like culture is creating this tension from them between their self-compassion and where they want to move to, and maybe what those cultural norms or expectations may look like, what's some wisdom you would give them to allow both of them to exist and hold that tension?
So I think, you know, culture is a big thing that as therapists we need to be aware of. And I think just as human beings that we need to be aware of, because I think that there's so many judgments of things that we don't know. And that person could be struggling because of traditions or, like you said, just culture, beliefs, anything like that. And so I like to definitely talk to them about that if they'll share it with me. You know, what does that look like? I might say, you need to leave this family or boundaries or whatever that looks like, but that may not be what the client wants or needs. And so I think it's also talking through, what does their family traditions look like? What does their culture look like? What are some of their beliefs? And the things that they want, that's the goals that I want to work to make sure that they're safe. Not my agenda or society's agenda. What do they want? Because we don't want to also cause more friction within the family because we're trying to lead them in somewhere that they don't want to go. And so I think it's being able to see where they're at. If they want to work on, you know, separating some of those or talking about secrets, like how do we show them that they have trust and there is safety and it's okay if that's what they want.
Yeah, I think about that so often in the clinical context and then also just in life, right? That there's sometimes seasons where we're closer, with people, and there's sometimes seasons that we pull back, and that pull back doesn't have to be forever. It may just be while we're growing or while we're healing or while we're working on something or developing different boundaries. I think a thing I like to think about too is I like to tell people, what's the part of your history, your heritage, your culture that's really important to you that you want to integrate and keep in your life? And what's a part of it that maybe you want to renegotiate and you want to do it differently? And so you want that to look a little bit different for you. And so how do you have both of those versus sometimes maybe feeling like they have to choose one or the other?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I agree. I think it's helping them, again, balance it out and creating that rhythm for themselves.
Yeah, that flow, right? It's all a negotiation. And what might work for somebody else may not work for you. And that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sandra, you have given us so much wisdom today on just understanding that life in and of itself has ebbs and flows and is going to be bumpy. And we're going to have some hills, we're going to have mountains, but we're also going to have some deep valleys and some crevices. And so how do we just kind of ride those out? You've given us great tools in awareness, in really advocating and labeling what's going on with us to share with others as well as ourselves to maintain that connection, and then really just evaluating things. Anything else that you would want to leave our listeners with?
I just think in the time that we're in right now, just love each other, love yourselves, and just try to have self-compassion and have compassion for others. Let's create a new rhythm.
I love that. Thank you. As we wrap up today's episode on honoring your natural rhythms, I want to thank our guest, Sandra Rivera, for sharing such valuable insights. It's so important to remember that life isn't about punishing ourselves or pushing ourselves or demanding things of ourselves or others, that it's really about being able to identify and bring awareness to where we are and respect the natural flow of energy and emotions, using time as a resource. And when we do that, it opens the door to so much more in greater mental clarity, emotional balance, as well as overall well-being. And again, a healthier mental health for everyone. So I encourage you to take a moment this week to just really tune in, check in with yourself, ask yourself, where are you at in your rhythm? Is it working for you? Are you needing a faster pace, a slower pace? Where are you at? What season are you in? And what do you need to honor yourself in that season? Not judging yourself, but as Sandra said, bringing that compassion in. If you found today's episode helpful, make sure that you support it by sharing it, liking it, subscribing, and rating it so that we know what you're enjoying and what's bringing value to you. We want you to never miss an episode because we truly care about changing mental health with you. Until next time, remember honoring your natural rhythms and changing your own mental health to create a flow of wellness is really what's going to keep you sustainable and be life-giving and a way to show love to yourself and others. Thank you.